Hi everyone. So today in class we started talking about all the different disorders of the DSM-5 and we got through the anxiety disorder cluster, and so the three that you need to know are generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, and phobic disorder. And then tonight what I want to get through are the obsessive compulsive and related disorder cluster and the trauma and stressor based disorder cluster. So we'll have all three of these done before tomorrow. I would reference the little sheet that I gave you in class that has all of the disorders on it too, just so that you can kind of keep them straight. So let's start with the obsessive compulsive and related disorder cluster. These are the specific disorders that fall under that category that you want to know. Your typical OCD, body dysmorphic disorder, hoarding disorder, trichotillomania, and excoriation, which is skin picking. So we're going to go through each one of these now. So what is obsessive compulsive disorder? It's made up of two things, obsessions and compulsions. So an obsession is an uncontrollable pattern of thought. Did I lock my door? Am I clean enough? Are there germs on whatever I'm touching? The compulsion is the behavioral coping mechanism for how you reduce the anxiety that your obsessions are causing. So if I have an uncontrollable thought that I didn't lock my door, how am I going to get rid of that anxiety that's caused by that thought? Well, I'm going to go lock my door. But someone with an OCD is going to go lock that door 30 times in the night just to make sure that they locked it. Or they're going to unplug their outlet 30 times because they don't want to start a house fire. Or they're going to wash their hands 100 times in 2 hours because they have so much anxiety about germs that that coping behavior helps reduce it in the moment. So to have OCD, you have to have both of those things, obsessions and compulsions. And they vary. Like you can have obsessions that deal with germs. I think those are the most common. Like I said, safety issues, organizational issues. There's hoarding issues as well, which we'll get to with this, but you have to have both because sometimes people can have obsessions without compulsions that follow them. And then the key thing to know with this is that people with OCD know that it's wrong. They know that their coping behaviors are not functional in society, but they still do it anyway and they can't stop. So that's where it's really painful for them. Why do they develop obsessions and compulsions? There's a couple theories. One is that it serves as a diversion from their real fear, so it reduces anxiety. Two is that it gives, when they do something correct, like if they wash their hands or when they organize something, it makes them feel like they've accomplished something and gives them evidence that they've done something well, and so that can reduce anxiety. There are some genetic components to this as well, and there are brain differences in certain parts of the limbic system of OCD patients than regular patients that do not have OCD. Here are some common examples of obsessions and compulsions that we see with people with OCD. So it's not just your normal, let me wash my hands 100 times a day. Although another common thing that people with verminophobia will do with OCD is they'll take showers for like 3 hours and scrub and scrub and scrub, sometimes scrubbing off their skin or scrubbing their skin raw because obviously when you do that to your skin for a long time, it's going to be damaged.
Elizabeth McInvale has lost control of her life. The 20-year-old University of Houston student scrubs her hands sometimes up to 100 times a day.
Clean underneath all my fingernails every time.
You can see how raw and discolored her hands are. Her fear of contamination results in many other exhausting daily rituals that she just can't help. Elizabeth suffers from obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD.
Ritual after ritual, day after day, and OCD becomes a living nightmare.
Elizabeth can't even make it through part of her day without these neurotic, obsessive actions to avoid germs.
So I have to open the door with my foot.
See how she won't even touch the light switch with her hands? And when she tries to get dressed, many of her clothes are off limits.
All the stuff that's contaminated in here, like these pants are contaminated from vacation.
Her life, like millions of others with OCD, is so tough that she sometimes takes out her aggressions on her walls.
I get so frustrated that I kick and punch holes.
No one knows Elizabeth's frustration more than her sister, who also lives with her.
It's so sad to see my sister tell me multiple times a month that she wishes she was dead. And I mean, you can't do anything about it.
And Elizabeth isn't alone in this nightmare.
There are probably between 4 and 8 million people in the United States alone that have obsessive compulsive disorder.
Among them, actor Leonardo DiCaprio says he was sometimes obsessive compulsive as a child. Fittingly, DiCaprio played another high-profile OCD sufferer, Howard Hughes, in the film The Aviator. And notice on Deal or No Deal, Howie Mandel won't shake hands with contestants because of his reported OCD.
I don't shake hands. What I do is I I do this because I'm a little bit of a germaphobe.
And recently, international soccer star David Beckham revealed he has some form of the disorder. While there is no cure for Elizabeth and others suffering from OCD, behavior modification treatment has proven a step in the right direction. And that's why Elizabeth is now the national spokesperson for OCD awareness.
My name's Elizabeth, and I have obsessive-compulsive disorder. There are 500,000 teenagers in America just like me.
And for Elizabeth McInvale, getting help for those in her shoes is the best therapy of all.
There's people out there that struggle more than I do, and my heart goes out to them.
The second disorder in the OCD cluster is hoarding disorder, and it causes these people a lot of anxiety to get rid of their stuff. And so their coping behavior is they just don't throw anything away. And so I think the obsession would be keeping their stuff, not wanting to get rid of anything, and then the coping behavior being we're just going to keep all the stuff in the house. And so obviously it gets very messy, gets very dirty. So this is actually a new disorder from the DSM-5, but falls under the obsessive category. The third disorder in this cluster is body dysmorphic disorder. And body dysmorphic disorder is when a person is obsessed with their looks, and they think that they're very, very ugly, or they think that they have a ton of pimples on their face, so they won't go outside. So it's very dysfunctional. These people don't leave their homes a lot. So like if a girl has BDD, she might use skin cream all the time, like for several hours a day, she'll rub skin cream onto her face, or she can't go without like 30 minutes without looking at a mirror because she needs to check herself to make sure that she doesn't look awful. If someone is really self-conscious about their earlobes or something with BDD, they might walk around like this so that nobody sees their earlobes. So very, very self-conscious about how they look. It's not an eating disorder, so most of them don't have anorexia or bulimia in addition to this. This is just they're very obsessed with the imperfections of their body and either fixing them or keeping them from people. A lot of times people with BDD will get plastic surgery, or they will also sometimes perform surgery on themselves to try and remove things, which obviously leads to more injury, and it's just awful. The other phenomenon that occurs with this disorder is that people with BDD tend to see themselves in mirrors differently than how they really look. And so as you can see in the picture, a very, very, very skinny girl is seeing herself as thicker than what she really is. And psychologists don't know why this phenomenon occurs. It actually occurs opposite in men. So a lot of times men will see, like, they'll be really thick bodybuilders, but they'll see themselves as skinnier than what they are. And so we actually see this phenomenon a lot in the male bodybuilding profession. A lot of them have BDD. It's not a fun disorder. A lot of them become suicidal, both men and women, because they just can't help the imperfections that they're feeling, and they want to hide that from people. So we'll watch some videos on it tomorrow in class to kind of show you some real-life examples of people that have the disorder. The only other famous example I know of, if you've ever heard of the Carpenters, they were a really old band. Sharon Carpenter, I think maybe was the lead singer. Or, no, Karen Carpenter. That was her name. Karen Carpenter was lead singer, but she died of BDD. She saw herself as fatter than what she was, and then became anorexic with it, didn't eat, and ended up starving to death and having a heart attack. So not a fun disorder. The fourth disorder is trichotillomania, and this is hair pulling disorder. So they don't really have obsessions, they just have a lot of anxiety, and the coping behavior for their anxiety is to pull out their hair. And a lot of times this is the hair on their head, but it can also be eyebrows, it can be hair on the skin, or like if a guy has like a lot of hair on his back or something, he might pull it off of his back. Very similar to trichotillomania is excoriation, which is skin picking. So it's not OCD because they don't really have obsessions, but they have a lot of anxiety, and how they cope with it is they pick their skin. A lot of times people that are on the autism spectrum will have excoriation in addition to the autism, where you'll see them rocking and picking at their skin. I had an autistic student a couple years ago who would just pick and pick, like his hand was just constantly in the back of his shirt all day, all class, on his shoulder, just picking off his skin and ripping it and ripping it. One of my bridesmaids actually has this mildly where she'll just, all the skin around her fingernails, much like this picture here, she just picks and picks and picks. Like that's the coping behavior that reduces her anxiety. And so this is why it falls under that related category of obsessive and compulsive disorder. So we're going to move on to that last cluster I mentioned earlier, the trauma and stressor-based disorders. So again, it's on your sheet. There's really only one that I want you to know for this cluster, and that's post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. And I'm sure most of you have heard about it. It's in the news a lot with soldiers coming back from the conflict in the Middle East, or you maybe heard about it with Wounded Warrior Project. So it's a very it's good because it's getting a lot of media attention, and I think a lot of money is going towards rehabilitation for people that have PTSD. But what is it? It's a condition where someone experiences something very traumatic, and then they experience symptoms following that event that kind of haunt them the rest of their lives or for a long extended period of time. So this traumatic event could be war, could be if you have been sexually assaulted, it could be if you were in like a really bad car accident or a natural disaster of any kind. Like any sort of catastrophe could cause PTSD in people. And so some of the flashbacks, or excuse me, some of the symptoms are involuntary flashbacks, recurring nightmares, insomnia, feelings of guilt if you've done something wrong in that catastrophe. Like a lot of times war veterans will feel really guilty if they had to kill somebody. They'll be socially withdrawn, and they'll be very jumpy or anxious in certain situations. A lot of times if they smell something that was they were also smelling during the time of the event, that'll get them to flashback, and sometimes they can enter a different state of mind. And when someone has it, it takes a while to get rid of. Lots and lots of therapy. They try to coincide and use medication with it to help reduce their anxiety. A good example, I don't know if you guys in U.S. history talked about the My Lai massacre during the Vietnam War, but there was a specific unit of soldiers that went to My Lai, which is a town in Vietnam. They thought they were all communist supporters, so they went in there and killed them all. It turns out they were all just innocent women and children. The men had gone to market for the day, and so they killed, I think, 100 or 200 innocent women and children. And I remember watching interviews when I used to teach U.S. history. All those soldiers, like even just talking about it, would just shake, and you could see their symptoms of PTSD, and they were suffering from that from the rest of their lives. So the important thing to know about this, though, is that really it's about 20% of women and 10% of men that experience this after a traumatic event. So most of us are pretty resilient after going through a really traumatic event, and we don't develop PTSD. So, but it is a really interesting disorder, and one that I think has gotten a lot more attention during our current day, and that's good because, you know, it was taboo to talk about this back in the day, and a lot of people didn't get treatment for it and suffered a lot because of it. So that wraps up this video. So far we're done with these three clusters: anxiety disorders, OCD and related, and trauma-based disorders. You should be done with module 65 and 66, and then tomorrow in class I plan on showing you a couple more videos about these disorders, and then we'll maybe start the next cluster around the circle. So see you then.